Sure. Now, Corruption Watch has released a report on corruption affecting the Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, or TERS fund. The fund was introduced in March last year to assist companies who could not cover the full salaries of workers during the hard lockdown. Between March and July last year, more than 37 billion rand from the Unemployment Insurance Fund was disbursed. Karam Singh is the head of legal and investigations at Corruption Watch. He joins us now. Mr. Singh, the TERS scheme was a lifeline for people who couldn't get any form of income otherwise, but there were problems. Just outline what you found.
Thanks very much. We received well over 100 complaints from members of the public, primarily employees who had an expectation of receiving the benefit from the scheme, who in a variety of different cases didn't receive the benefit, received it late, or partially received it. The allegations were wide-ranging, primarily against private employers who were deemed to engage in fraudulent activities, but also allegations against officials within the Department of Labor, in some cases for collusion with employers, and in other cases just for the poor administration of the system, which meant that wrong people got paid, and in some cases others didn't get paid.
Yeah.
We know that the Auditor General did make a strong intervention in this area, and there were improvements in the system, and financial recoveries were made. Over 3 billion rand worth of recoveries were made, but it was a system mired in different challenges. On the one hand, fraud, corruption, and in a broad way, maladministration within the system.
Let's separate it out. How rife was the corruption within the organization? You talk about officials clearly then just channeling money to their friends and benefiting on the side.
You know, what we received by way of complaints, I think, is a drop in the ocean. I think if you look at the two reports that the Auditor General issued last year, it was a widespread problem. It was a problem involving millions of rands. We have some complainants who never even received that benefit. So it really was a significant challenge and a real failure in the system when people were at their most desperate.
Yeah.
Finding themselves unemployed. We know that the Minister of Labour has put senior officials at the UIF on suspension with regard to other allegations of corruption over and beyond those that were received by Corruption Watch.
And then you talk about the private companies. So these are companies that got money for their workers, didn't pass it on to their workers. Can you tell the scale of that? How many of them were found out, were caught? How many weren't caught and got away with it?
It's very difficult for us to quantify that. In some cases, we have now referred these issues of criminality into law enforcement. I know that the SIU has been seized with this matter, and there have been interim reports. But as you know, the processes around criminal investigations and around accountability and prosecutions is very time-consuming, which is why we've placed emphasis on the need for preventative measures and ensuring that the system is more corruption-proof, so that the challenge is really, once the money goes out and once the money's misspent or stolen, it's very difficult to recover. Yeah. So it's a valid, but it's very difficult for us to provide to quantify that at this stage.
So I understand that, and you're saying you're working with complaints that were made to you as Corruption Watch. I'm just trying to gauge, because there are companies sitting out there. I know some of them, they said they applied, they just waited, nothing happened, or they were rejected. An opinion, if you can give it, on balance, do you think that the majority of worthy recipients received something, or were most of those worthy recipients, the people who should have got the money, left out in the cold?
No. I mean, it's clear that significant payouts were made. I mean, we're talking about tens of billions of rands, but we know that at least over 3 billion rand was recovered in irregular payments, which is anywhere up to 10% of the total payout. So, I mean, I think the scale of this and the consequences for private employees, employers is still to play out. And I think we're going to have to direct those questions to law enforcement and follow up with them about whether we'll see any real accountability for the kind of criminal fraud that we saw in this case.
And I think the Auditor General did acknowledge it was a very different, the UIF was meant for one thing, and all of a sudden it was redirected to these payments, huge logistical challenges, system challenges. You do have recommendations. Can you outline those for us?
The recommendations are very broad, and they relate to the need for law enforcement to be engaged, to be able to follow up quickly when these allegations come out. There were challenges that came out around the IT system and the ICT infrastructure at the Department of Labor, its interface with other government IT systems, so that it could pick up red flags and provide that kind of comfort that the system was not so vulnerable to the kind of manipulation that we saw. So certainly there's needs for improvements in terms of the ICT infrastructure, for better processes and for better internal controls.
Does this report give us any insight as South Africans into what's coming now, the vaccine procurement? I mean, there's been also corruption around PPE. The procurement of vaccines will be centralized now. Could that cut out, in your opinion, a lot of the profiteering of something that is really needed?
I think this is still a major concern. I mean, we've got the issue around the vaccine procurement, and we're getting information from the Department of Health in drips and drabs about how that's taking place. But we have to remember that, it's not just about the procurement of the vaccine. We're looking at a whole rollout of this program, which is going to involve, I listened to your interview earlier with the nurses union. It's going to involve education, education of frontline workers, education of the public. We've got issues around the distribution, the cold storage, the transport, which will involve many players within the supply chain. And what we're not seeing now is any indication of a coherent plan around procurement relating to this rollout, and whether any extra measures are going to be put in place. So, the sense we have from Corruption Watch is that we haven't really walked such a long journey from the PPE debacle, and it's not clear that we've learned sufficient lessons from the PPE procurement to put the kind of oversight mechanisms in place to ensure that the supply chain is secure and that we won't the type of scandals involving politically exposed persons as well, which was a feature of the PPE procurement.
Yeah, and could we talk about government's approach? I mean, so even if procurement is centralized, you still have distribution, but surely we have distribution channels already for other vaccines, people that are doing this sort of thing. Can government say that's the way we'll go, or does it have to be sort of a tender bonanza again with all the risks associated with that?
Regardless of whether government goes emergency procurement, a sole supplier, or a kind of tender system, I think what we're asking for now is tell us what the rules of the game are. Tell us how this process is unfolding. The briefings that we received thus far have been very thin on details about how the overall plan is going to unfold and what extra measures are going to be put in place. So, for instance, is the Auditor General going to be activated the way that they were the first time around to be able to do real-time audits? Does the SIU existing proclamation, will that apply to allegations of corruption and fraud which will take place during this process? So we need more disclosure, we need greater transparency, we need greater coherence and communication with the public in order to increase our levels of trust, because the distrust and the cynicism that we have as the public is only borne out by our recent experience. It's not because we want to burden public officials. We want to do what we can to help government to make this a success. This is going to involve multiple stakeholders across civil society and the private sector to ensure that this does not become another corruption disaster.
All right, thank you very much. That was Karam Singh, Head of Legal and Investigations at Corruption Watch. We take a short break, lots more to come.